First off, I want to thank Mr. Croft for the introduction because when we talk about painted drums, the eagle is very prevalent right off the bat. So we're back into the birds a little bit. Morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is a correlation, a relationship in a sense. When you talk about early flags, and we were talking about the troop flag, et cetera, the individuals who painted early flags were itinerant painters to some extent. They painted flags. They painted signs, business signs that hung on establishments. And the same individuals painted drums. So you have a overlap in the continuity. And I want to, beat my drum about this a little bit. If you're involved in flags, or you're involved in any antiques or collecting drums, knowledge is important. Not just the internet, et cetera, but knowing about them, understanding the intricate details to say, is it real? Is it a reproduction? Is it a fake? If anybody in here actually collects flags, et cetera, and the need for conservation. Looking at that is what I can see there. Okay. We're starting with, as you can see this picture here, it's going to talk about the golden age of painted drums. What do I mean by that? In the last 100+ years, we've seen the American public begin to look into its past and to start collecting all types of antiques, or at least in their minds, historic treasures of American history. This interest in both history and collecting materials from the past has changed direction, unfortunately, and is now declining from the significant market and varied population representation. It had exploded after World War II and reaching a peak, and now it appears to be declining. The role of the old drum as a wastebasket, corner table, or umbrella stand has changed. So have the prices, by the way, with fewer pieces coming out of homes or roadside antique shops. There aren't any roadside antique shops anymore. Most are found in old collections. The objective of this chat is to both entertain, to some extent I hope, and provide some modest knowledge. I hope the education helps individuals here if they look at or find a drum. The drum being used by the military goes back to the beginning of recorded history, as does pennants or flags. The basic purpose remaining the same. A drum was, and is today, a tool to stir the spirit, prepare for battle or conflict, and give commands or communications, be it a tribal drum from the beginning of the human history or a modern military drum. The cadence and music thus stir the spirit. Mankind has always prepared for battle with song or dance, and the drum has been used for this purpose by all peoples throughout the planet. As students or collectors, we immediately know the term golden age for those who study Pennsylvania or Kentucky rifles. There is also, I believe, a golden age of decorated military drums. In the modern American history age, I'm creating a period perhaps from 1770 to 1870. Part of that is based on the fact that there's very few 18th century drums extant. You go to the museums in Europe, France, England, Germany, and you will find earlier drums. As the artistic skill, and as I've mentioned, predate the timelines I've mentioned. We're going to continue along here, and we're going to start. The age in which the drum was manufactured and used can be determined by some basic observations. This is just a potpourri of a French drum and some 18th century material. When we talk about drums and conservation, this is what the drum looked like when it was first found. This drum probably was a trophy. It came out of New England from the French and Indian War. You can see the French emblem on it, et cetera, et cetera. That's what it looked like. The skin heads, the body, the hoops, and some rope, which was not really old rope. So I'm going to talk to you about that a little bit. The basic construction, height of the drum, and style of painting also helps to determine its age. As noted in the image we're reviewing, we see both a unique style to the artwork, and one thing I'll add is when you're looking at flags and you count the stars, it's a 13-star flag. Whether it's 18th century or 19th century, you're counting the stars. When you look at painted drums, and I'll show you some. If the artist was adding stars and it was a good day, he might put the 13 in. He might put 12, he might put whatever. So you can't take that factor and say, that's when it started. So what we're doing is following the images. You'll see that we see a variety of artwork as it develops and becomes more standard with the regulation format and style of eagle. This pattern comes into prominence by the 1850s, and it was most significant during the Civil War. The bulk of the large number of Civil War surviving examples were made by government contract and have the ribbon in the U.S. eagle's mouth. The early techniques, the heraldic eagles and hand workmanship, depart after the Civil War or the end of the Golden Era. You don't find the drums as decorated by any stretch of the imagination. So we'll start. There's what a French drum looked like. If you saw, that's what it looked like restored. It's just like a flag. You can have a flag. You want to conserve it, put it in a frame, protect it. The same thing with the drum. The size of that drum, and in the handout it gives you the dimensions, is tall, long. My perception and belief is, if you go to see the early European drums, you'll see that height because they're not marching. They're coming out of a fortification, they're in a fortified town, and they're using a long drum. By the time you get to the colonies and you're using the drum in a military capacity, that depth is detrimental, so they're reduced. That drum is fairly high in size, but I think it came from Europe. This next drum here is there's only very few drums with an actual factual basis that they were regimental drums, not just early drums that were carried in the American Revolution. This one is one of them, and you're going to see the picture of it. There it is. How do we determine the age of the drum? Well, you look at the construction, we're looking at the painting, and a variety of details here. One, the body of the drum is glued, it's steamed and glued, and then of course you'll find a tack design. This early drum has rosehead nails, typical of the 18th century. One. Two, it has, as you can see, a pine tree symbol, as you would find on flags, et cetera, et cetera. The pine tree is obsolete by the latter part of the American Revolution. So we have a drum with rosehead nails, which you'll see. The scroll work, the rococo, is similar to what you'd find in furniture in the 18th century. You see a pine tree, and there's in the ribbon, it's in Latin. It says, "Noble and just to die for one's country." When you look at 18th century regimental flags, it's in Latin. If you look at the earliest regimental flag of the United States Army after the Revolution, Wayne's Legion color at West Point, which was in my collection at one time, the scroll work is First Sub Legion. It's not in Latin anymore. So we take those different factors to help identify it. There you can see the rosehead nails used. They always have an overlap, and in this early case, it's nails. By the 19th century, it becomes more decorative. So you can identify a drum by the painting, if you understand it, by a label. You find them in the 18th century, and you find them into the 19th century. There's an air hole. That hole wasn't a mistake. It's necessary for the drum beating. If you look in the hole of the drum, in many cases, you'll see a label. That label, and you'll see some labels here, is handwritten. Other times it's printed. So you have ways of determining who made the drum, the time period, et cetera, et cetera. The next drum here, where we're talking about birds, we got rid of that, the bird was in the tree, we got rid of the tree. This is the only known example of a federal drum to the regular Army. It says 1st Company, 1st Battalion, 2nd Regiment. The militia in the 1790s, big states, Pennsylvania, New York, didn't have multi-battalion organizations. So you narrow it down. The maker, Farley, had contracts in the Revolutionary War and was out of business by 1800. So we look at that eagle, We look at that, and that narrows it down to being a drum of the regular Army, which is the only extent one at this point in time known. There's your tack design. That's another way of determining who made it. What do you mean? Obviously, there's always exceptions, things of this nature. In the metropolitan areas, be it Philadelphia, which was a big metropolitan area, New York, the makers that had contracts or made quantities of drums used a tack design that's a signature. The different makers had a unique tack design. So there's different factors in it. This came out of the Richard Dietrich collection when I bought it. And Richard Dietrich was the gentleman who owned, well, Luton Cough Drops. So he was comfortable. He passed away. But his flag collection sold at Freeman's in Philadelphia here. And it was the flags off the U.S. Constitution when it went into Portsmouth in the 1850s. And interesting, if you like flags, if you really dig into that, the individual, the government employee who was responsible for selling off the extra boats, the canvas, the flag, took the flags home. Literally at the beginning of the 1900s, there were 2 wooden crates with flags from the Constitution. One was all filled with bug infestation, and they just threw them away. The other ones were kept. They went to an antique dealer, and Dietrich got them. There's a catalog Freeman's did, and it may be online still, that shows the colors from the Constitution. I can add that the Navy, I talked to a representative, he says, oh, everything's from the Constitution. Harry Langley, who was at the time in charge of the Naval Department at the Smithsonian, he's passed away. You couldn't get flag bunting. These flags were huge, these Navy flags. I mean, from that wall to here, it's late 18th, early 19th century flag bunting. It's all hand stitched. Nobody could find the fabric or the pre-mercurized thread to do those flags. They came off the Constitution, but I'm digressing. Let's continue. Here's the labels I told you. Drums made, sold, et cetera, and Henry Fraley, Germantown. Germantown is now part of Philadelphia. Then it was a separate province, and it was full of German immigrants. So you'll find a number of the drums that I'm mentioning and showing you from Germantown. That's the early labels before they started printing them, as you can see. Very interesting when you talk about Philadelphia and you're going to different sites. At one time, the Frankfurt Arsenal was here, now it's closed. The Schuylkill Arsenal, which became the Defense Supply Agency, is closed, and the Navy Yard. So the city lost 3 major components that have been here since the 18th century. But one of the roads into the Frankfurt Arsenal was Fraley Street. So he must have been rather prominent at the time, what can I tell you? Showing you a difference here. Showing you the tack design is basically the same with the exception of the addition of these V's. This man, that's his label in there. He didn't make drums. He literally had a business. He was buying materials, as you can see here, Front Street, parasols, plain or decorative, et cetera, and I think blinds, sofas, early chairs, what he was producing. So he acquired drums, their colors and fifes, etc. He was buying drums probably from Fraley, but they changed the tack design because he was selling it. Like Sears and Roebuck may not have made the thing, but they were selling it. The next one is going to get into the Eagles. There is a flag in the Chicago Historical Society, which is noted to be one of the flags that was produced for the Lewis and Clark expedition. It is a national standard, 13 stripes, and in the canton is an eagle. Winter Tour did an exhibit. They did the colors, the Tarleton colors that came out of England when sold at Sotheby's. They had those on exhibit, others. It was basically Betsy Ross, and I'm just saying that in a broad sense. The eagle in that canton was that eagle. It's very dramatic, it's very symbolic, and it's very well done. So when we're talking about the high points of art, be it in a drum, be it in a flag, you look at that eagle. That eagle was the same one I mean, literally, the artist may have been the same artist. I can't determine that factually, but the style, everything on it was the same. So that's what I'm calling the early 19th century dramatic American eagle. Here you go, you have the tack design, boom. Tack design is a signature, it also holds the drum together, and it's attractive, it's decorative. You see, this drum came out of an estate in South Carolina. The family tradition had it as their ancestor was a drummer during the War of 1812. In all reality, it fits that scenario. It came with the drumsticks and the linen shoulder strap. If you look at the basic components, if you look at this, it's like there's two standards. When you go buy a car, you can get this model. If you want to throw in some extra money, you've got an additional sound system, et cetera, et cetera. If you look at this, and you look at the style here, the head on the eagle, the stars, and realize in the early period, they're all multi-pointed stars. But again, if it's 13, it doesn't mean it's a 13-star period. It's decorative in many cases. That Froiley, the turkey eagle that we saw, that one, the stars in the shield, there's 12 of them. It was a bad day, that's all. I mean, because we know it wasn't before there were 13 colonies. So here's a drum, obviously of the period. Now you can see the details. The drums, in my opinion, when you find them, this drum was cleaned, not overpainted or anything, and re-roped and put back together. Having it falling apart and dirty in the corner isn't aesthetically attractive and isn't marketable either for an antique dealer. So restoring them is important. Here's another drum. It's the same circle, the same detail, other than the fact that there's more gold highlights. So whoever acquired that drum, militia unit, band, parade group, whatever, they paid a premium to get a little more detail into it. There's the tack design of this maker. It's a different tack design. As you can see, the tack design on both of these drums is the same, and there's the label of the maker in New York City. Here it's a printed label. He had them printed and then glued them onto the drum. Typical, there's nothing wrong with the basic maple drum with red painted hoops. Bands, military organizations used them from the beginning from the 18th century through the middle of the 19th century. Their value is not the same as the painted drums. It's as simple as that. Rarity, visual appeal, and provenance, which is probably the same with flags. That's a different tack design, and that's who made it. What's interesting with this gentleman is he dated all his paper labels have a different, they have the date that he produced the drum, which makes life easier for somebody trying to determine the age of the piece. That's what you'll find lots of times. You don't pay the same for that as one with that magnificent eagle that I showed you earlier. Unless, of course, they're giving you a history and it was carried by a Confederate throughout the war and he got hit with a cannonball but survived. Just like flags. You want to know the real facts about the piece. Here's the tack design on this one. And Albany, New York. See the stylization of the eagle? It's not going to be like the traditional drum that we continue on, you'll see. The way it is, the other factor is the military drums, government military drums, the background for the infantry, the major branch of the service that would use drums, is a blue color. This one's background in red, and obviously the ribbon goes Regiment U.S. Artillery. So that is a rare drum. Different tack design again. And there's the label there. So again, stylized eagle, the riband, the ribbon, United States Marine Corps. Again, a different tack design. Not sure who did this. It's similar to Horseman Philadelphia, but it isn't. But Horseman had the contract in the 1830s for them. As you noted with flags, and you can see the overlap, even though I'm beating the drum, is that you find state seals, eagles, and the artists that did them did both items, definitely. Here you have the state seal, right there. This came out of a museum, actually, with a sling and a pair of drumsticks, and you see the state seal with, virtue, liberty, independence, and then the militia organization. This is probably from about the 1840 period. State seal drums are rare. It's like any antiques. The earlier you go, the fewer pieces extant, and if it's of any consequence, it's important to have its history. There again, that's the same tack design you saw previously, and here's a change in the label a little bit. State seal of New Jersey, City Battalion, Company A, and we were able to track that down, or who and what and where. And that's who made that. That's what becomes, by the middle of the 19th century, the 1850s, the American Eagle. When you look at the background and say, oh, it's green, it's got to be a rifleman's rare. Nope, it's the varnish, the shellac, and everything. It was a light blue. There's the tax design, again, a different one. Interesting thing about this drum, we quick, came with the sling and the string. The wooded area all around the sides, carves in it, names, et cetera, Second Corps. This drum was carried by the drum major of the 1st Minnesota. The very symbolic and dramatic aspect is the battle honors, 1st Minnesota Volunteer Infantry, are painted there in red. The bottom one is in black for Gettysburg. They lost 81% killed. You can see all red in Gettysburg on the bottom black. Okay, this is the standard Civil War Eagle drum, contracts, the ribbon, riband with a unit designation. In this case, whoever painted it put the company on the top of the shield. When you find these drums and they're scratched in and all, an antique dealer, somebody's giving it a history because they want to sell it for more. They painted them nicely, they cared for them. That's the Rogers drum, okay. There are plenty of these surplus drums around, they're still collectible. Again, different thing. You have variety. Again, the patriotic symbol, the panoply, the shield, the eagle, tack design. Whoever made this drum made barrels. The poor son of a gun that carried it, if you look carefully when we show the pictures, it's made like a barrel, not bent and steamed. That's the state seal of New York, as you can see. But here you can see the seam. Whoever made that drum made a barrel, and normally they steam the wood. That weighed a ton. That was like the little guy in World War II that carried the BAR for the squad. Interesting here, this is one of 2 known examples. Eagle drum made in the ribbon, it says, welcome home our wonderful guest, right there. And then the state seal of Pennsylvania, liberty, et cetera, et cetera. Paper label in it is 1824. They made brass drums too, mostly in Europe. That's a trophy of the Mexican War, probably made in France, and the emblem was added to it. We're done.